We were supposed to see this film, which I unfortunately have to call Candyman, open bracket, 2021, close bracket, in June of 2020, then September, then October, then Universal threw a dart at a calendar, and it landed on August 2021. And that's why I uploaded the Candyman 1992 review when I did. At least a year and a half after the socio-political moment this movie was meant to address, I'd argue, had thoroughly and completely passed it by. I don't know what would have happened if the plague hadn't come, and if this movie had come out when originally intended. But I can guess. Best case scenario, it would have become the flashpoint of a moral panic, like they tried to do with 2019's Joker. Will this movie warp the fragile minds of young American males into becoming murder ghosts, and killing the cops who have already killed them? Don't think about it too hard. It doesn't have to make sense. It just has to get Republicans to vote in November. Worst case scenario, and therefore, in my opinion, far more likely case scenario, this movie would have been immediately caught up in the discourse around the murder by cop of George Floyd in Minneapolis on May 23rd, 2020, and the subsequent protests against murderous cops everywhere. Protests that were already nearing their terminal phase as the summer got hotter and the mainstream media coverage of them got dumber and meaner. Not that it was ever very good to begin with. But by late June, I was already noticing two distinct strands forming. Either yelling at protesters to shut up and go home, lest they hurt the Democratic Party's electoral chances in November, or breathlessly repeating corporate press releases about how, hey, Charmin put BLM in their Twitter bio, so all you protesters really should just shut up and go home, lest you hurt the Democratic Party's electoral chances in November. Which is how I got, presumably real people, in my comments, specifically the comments of the Candyman, open bracket, 1992, close bracket review, telling me how, and I quote, "The mainstream media, many big businesses, and Hollywood are on my side," unquote. And to all those of you who think that, this next section of the review is dedicated to you. Buddy, I'm a comic book fan. I learned real hard, real early, that even the corporations I'm supposed to like aren't on my side. You know, whatever you think my side entails. They're on the side of getting my money, and they will say and do whatever they think will ensure that outcome. But make no mistake, if they thought it would make their third quarter profits tick up by even a fraction of a percentage point, they would gladly kill me and smile while they did it. Like Batman does in Batman Returns, with that one circus strongman dude. Like, that's the kind of smile Warner Brothers would smile at me. Disney, of course, doesn't even know I exist, and thank God for that. So yes, defund the police. Because not only did no one actually do that, the cops immediately turned around and pretended that they did, and used that as an excuse to demand more money. Hell, abolish the police, because deep in their bones they seem to realize something that our elected leaders either cannot or just frankly refuse to. That modern American police forces are basically legalized mobs running city-sized protection rackets. And rather than seeing elected civic leaders as their partners or bosses, as in my town, where the mayor is also the police commissioner for some absurd 19th century reason, cops only see our democratic institutions as those who press the money button. And that's all. Even the vaguest possible hint of a city or a city government taking any other action whatsoever except pressing the money button will be seen as a threat to the cop prerogative and met with the most naked of shakedown tactics, as happened this year in my town. Nice, yuppie, hipster tech worker enclave you got here. Sure would be a shame if anything happened to it. Like if we stuck our thumbs up our asses until the next round of contract negotiations were up. And it sure would be a shame if all the local criminals found out we were doing just that. Oh look, here's noted cop PR spokesperson Bacon McCheese right now, explaining our intentions to stick our thumbs up our asses to every major media outlet in the local market. Gee, where did this uptick in crime come from? Must have been all those skinny college kids yelling defund the police 2 years ago. Bet you wish you hadn't listened to them now, huh, Mr. Mayor? Game, set, match. Money button go brrr. The fact that no one actually listened to those skinny college kids 2 years ago, other than to scold them and tone police their slogans, does not matter one bit. Facts matter way less than a cop's feelings. And what was I talking about? Oh yeah, Candyman, 2021. A 20-year after-the-fact sequel that I actually enjoyed. This came as a great surprise, but it won me over right off. Because for almost 30 years, I've read the Candyman's frame job of Helen Lyle as an attempt to turn her into exactly the kind of urban legend he became in death. So within 5 minutes, our protagonist's girlfriend's brother is lighting candles to set the mood, and telling us all the legend of Helen Lyle, the mad scholar, who once upon a time went on a killing spree, kidnapped a baby right from its crib, and died in Cabrini Green's annual bonfire that they totally used to have back in the 90s. And that isn't a holdover from a short story that was originally set in Britain. For once, I actually didn't mind being right all the time. I even did the Rick Dalton pointing thing, like, right at the TV screen, and I'm not ashamed to admit it. Troy's art gallery directing sister, Brianna, is shacking up with Chicago artist Anthony McCoy. Inspired by Helen's legend, Anthony goes to the remains of Cabrini Green, now 20 years gentrified. The towers all knocked down, and the row houses so broken they make their 1990s selves look kept up. But life goes on, pretty much as ever. Everybody's got bills to pay and laundry that needs to get done. And if you're lucky, the local laundromat owner is still a repository of local lore, like Bill Burke, who meets Anthony among the broke-down houses and tells him a slightly closer to what we saw version of Helen's story, that she went looking for Candyman and found him. "What's Candyman?" Anthony asks, and we're off to the races. Rather than yet another rehash of the death and life of Daniel Robitaille, though we do get a little teeny tiny one of those later on, that frankly erases the other two Candyman movies from existence, either accidentally or on purpose, but I don't care because fuck those two. Burke tells Anthony a version of the legend from Burke's childhood in the 1970s. Quote, "For me, Candyman was a guy named Sherman Fields." Unquote. Sherman was beaten to death by a baseball team's worth of cops in the laundry room of one of the old tower blocks, falsely accused of the crime of putting razor blades in the candy he handed out to local children. Not only did young Bill watch this happen, his screams brought the cops to Sherman's location, Sherman having been hiding in the walls to evade the already legendarily murderous at the time attentions of the Chicago Police Department. Inspired by this story, Anthony makes a piece commemorating Sherman's untimely death, complete with a handout that practically dares its readers to call up Candyman in the mirror that is a part of the piece. Even Anthony, in a moment of artistic overenthusiasm at the completion of his piece, says Candyman 5 times into the mirrored surface of his and Brianna's floor-to-ceiling windows. And with that, we are truly off. Candyman 2021, then, is a dramatization of the act of watching Candyman 1992 and coming to understand and perhaps even empathize with the Candyman way more than, say, for example, Helen Lyle. It's meant to reflect that act, like a mirror, which is why the company logo at the start is backwards, why the credits play over an upside-down Chicago skyline, and why the Candyman himself begins to haunt Anthony from every mirrored surface he comes across. Some of them are even delightfully subtle, only visible to us, the audience, through perspective tricks. Over the course of the film, we learn that Anthony's art has accidentally passed on the Candyman's legend to a new generation. At first, it's only a few disinterested art snobs. But as the bodies start to pile up, and the word virus is loosed upon the world again, Anthony begins to change. His formerly warm demeanor fades. And through it all, we get periodic spurts of body horror. As if this movie didn't do enough for me already. In my research, I found 2 different murderers dubbed Candyman by the press in 1970s Texas alone. So I was perhaps already primed to view the Candyman as a polymorph, a conglomeration, a congregation, as he calls the citizens of Cabrini Green in the original film, a congress of sorrows. To find that the Candyman looks different to different people based upon the version of the Candyman legend that they heard. That the Candyman is subject to the observer effect, and that this is yet another way in which an urban legend, a sentient urban legend, can reproduce itself. After 2 movies with the same plot, 3, if you squint at the first one hard enough, and in the least charitable possible light, I felt this was a much-needed rejuvenation of the Candyman's mystique, and a way better opening to franchise this shit, since that is undoubtedly what Universal truly wanted, than just having Daniel Robitaille visit every majority-minority city in the country, so he could chase after yet another blonde white lady. Thus, I was probably also primed to appreciate the arc of Anthony McCoy. Candyman became an artist when Tony Todd came up with Daniel Robitaille's backstory. Now, here, finally, an artist becomes the Candyman after empathizing with him maybe a little too much. Or perhaps just the right amount. Oops, spoilers, I guess. But anyone who's watched Candyman 1992 as much as I have saw the almost obligatory twist coming from the cast list on IMDb. They got Vanessa Williams back to play Anthony's mom, and she kills it. So not only am I happy with all the choices this movie made, I'm ecstatic. This is a Candyman movie crafted for me, specifically. And you all can feel however you want about it. You can't have it. It's mine. I get why it almost immediately dropped off the map, though. The first 15 minutes are an expository storm. And we critics hate it when filmmakers try to beat us to the punch by putting a critic in their movies as a stand-in for us, and then killing that stand-in halfway through for the bad faith reading that filmmakers themselves put into the critic's mouth. See also Shyamalan, M. Night, Lady in the Water, The. Or don't. No, don't. Also, the one true Candyman scholar in this movie turns out to be, if not the villain, then at least the main human antagonist. But come on, people. Everybody says playing the villain is more fun anyway. And Colman Domingo's having an infectious amount of fun with it. He's crazy, yes, but he's also desperate, having long since given up on any hope of effecting positive change in his community or his nation, just like the rest of our fellow Americans. The real villain of this film is, obviously, the white supremacist violence that has sheltered and nurtured American capitalism since its inception. Hell, since about 150 years before its inception, if we're being honest, but we're not, oops. Can't talk about that in schools anymore. Capitalism needs an underclass to scare the middle class into showing up to work on time. And both political parties declare their allegiance to capitalism at the drop of a hat. So, we're fucked. Official channels are closed down. There is no hope, and there can be no change. Might as well become a murder ghost. There are those who took points off this movie's final score for explaining what gentrification is, at least twice, through the mouths of two separate characters. But I'm going to give it a pass for that, and take the opportunity to yell at my critical colleagues for a moment. Y'all do know that not everybody lives in a big city, right? And even those who do are most likely too busy just trying to get by to think very hard about why a whole block on their way to work has mutated into a bunch of postmodernist filing cabinets for yuppies and old folks, with maybe a couple Section 8 units in there so that the property owners can get government handouts and then probably spend all of their time at the dinner table complaining about, welfare queens. As if this film's namesake and predecessor wasn't also about gentrification, to pretty much exactly the same degree. Also, I award this movie extra points for having an initially less than sympathetic protagonist. Arguably, he gets either less or more sympathetic as time goes on, depending on your proclivities. The self-obsessed artist, whose obsession leads to the destruction of the self. Or, best case, the self's sublimation into something else. Something much older. Something beyond human. And that kind of story is very much in the Clive Barker... Barkerian? Barkist? No, I'm going with Barkerian. Tradition. I'd put Anthony somewhere between Book Helen and Movie Helen on the Harry D'Amour scale of Clive Barker protagonists that I just made up off the top of my head. His art gallery owner GF, Brianna, more or less becomes the protagonist as Anthony slips away from this mortal coil. And I'd put her more on par with Movie Helen in terms of sympathies. She's also much more in line with our director, Nia DaCosta's previous protagonist, Ollie, from her previous film, Little Woods. Brianna, like Ollie, is the long-suffering, clear-eyed pragmatist in her relationship. And like Ollie, she is trapped in the most insidious loop of all. Codependency. The maker of rational decisions in an irrational world that only gets more dream logic as the Candyman regains strength denied to him by 20 years of silence on the part of Cabrini Green's residents. A genuine, bona fide small business owner. The only category of American human our politicians still talk about positively, or even pretend to care about. And yet, where does that leave her in the end? In the back of a cop's car, her boyfriend already dead. Little Woods was the type of horror movie that doesn't get labeled a horror movie, because, frankly, it's too horrifying, both for self-proclaimed lovers of horror movies, and for those who only started admitting they like horror movies during the Trump administration. Officially a crime drama, it's a crime drama about how horrible things actually are out here in America, and about the horrifying lengths people have to go to just to get by. What's scarier, haunted houses, or the fact the bank can just take your mother's house after you just watched her die in it? The Babadook, or your sister's bad habit of making babies with the most dipshit of dudes. Kind of dudes who drink their lunches and then hit you up for pills once they get off work. Demons, or the fact it costs $10,000 to have a kid in this country that claims to love life so much. Murder ghosts, or the far more numerous and murderous cops. As Troy says at one point, to an Anthony who by that point in the film is not present in any sense of the word, Candyman ain't real. Nerd theory time. Even though I spent the last two Candyman reviews saying that Candyman ain't real are the true magic words that you want to use to call him to you. Troy doesn't get taken here, but this isn't a plot hole. I can fill it in quite easily. Troy is one of Helen's congregants. He is the keeper of the Helen Lyle legend. I mean, who wants to cross the original girl on fire? I'm going to say that again for those of you in the back. Troy is one of Helen's. Now you tell me that isn't a great pun. Like, 10 out of 10. Very punny. Right there. All my local pun appreciators, IRL, really dug that one. Even if it took them a minute. And that's true of the movie as a whole, really. I got it right away, but I had to explain it to one of my housemates. No, Brianna is not the Helen of this movie. That's Anthony. Brianna's more like young Jake, a necessary witness charged with telling the story to all and sundry by no less than Daniel Robitaille himself. But before that, Brianna also comes alive as not just the audiences, but also the artists stand in. Can I see myself? She asks the Chicago cop who is trying to get her to go along with their cover-up of her boyfriend's murder, before he's even cold. In universe, she asks, can I see myself, in order to gain access to a mirrored surface. In our universe, she's asking the question that previous creative teams should have asked themselves before they went and made 2 shit sequels. Can I see myself in Candyman? For some of us, the answer was, hell yes, even when we were 10. Tony Todd's just too cool. And that sweet fur coat is just too sweet. But now, 20 years later, I recognize some of us are weirdos. And it takes more than us to spread a legend. The good news is, there's more than one way for an urban legend to reproduce itself. And this movie is Ocelot in Metal Gear Solid 5. Go, it says. Let the legend come back to life. And I, for one, appreciate it. It's nice to end one of these franchise retrospectives on a high note. On a positive note. Like, that's certainly not going to happen very often. Probably won't happen around here again for a good long time. Unless I go back to The Matrix. Missed the 20th anniversary of the first film. But the 20th anniversary of the sequels is coming up next year. Thank you all for watching. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you like this video, hit the like button and the subscribe button and the little bell next to the subscribe button, assuming it's still here when you hear this. And if you really liked this review, then consider supporting the show on Patreon, like the fine people whose names I'm about to read to you right now. Mr. Hootie Dean, Detective Steve, The Aftermovie Diner, and StuG. Next time, actually, fuck The Matrix. There's some things we've got to take care of first.